Okay, thank you and welcome to episode 5 of Searching for the Question Live. With our usual rhythm, we do each day dedicated to a different theme in a loop, and you are welcome suggesting new themes so that the chain of days gets enriched with various things that have been suggested by you. We are streaming live simultaneously on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter. And as you send your questions, I will be able to look at them, answer them, and have an interaction between us. I am also looking forward to receive suggestions offline. You're welcome to subscribe and follow me on these various channels or others. David Orban is easy, and I will most likely be the one that you find as you search for me wherever. The theme today is COVID-19, as it was 3 days ago. And it is likely to be a recurring theme that is worth mentioning for several more days. Unsurprisingly, because this is a issue that we have to deal with, all of us. And the first time I described you my own experience, what it was like to live with COVID-19 in the very epicenter of the pandemic in Bergamo, Italy, and how important I felt it was for me to have you reach my message and understand that it is fundamental to implement physical distancing in your community in order to make sure that as few people get infected, that as few people get seriously ill, and that the health system doesn't break down, as it happened in Lombardy. It is astonishing because of how advanced the Italian healthcare system is, but if you go to a hospital today in Lombardy, you have an over 30% chance of dying. And you don't want the same to happen in your own community. So what I wanted is to invite somebody to talk together about broader perspectives of what is happening, for example, around COVID-19 in other countries, such as South Africa. Before having Abe Cambridge, who is my guest today, share his perspective, I wanted to show you what is a wonderful country. And I am not going to, of course, show you the safaris or the incredibly rich and fascinating cities of Cape Town or Johannesburg. But I just want to show you the map of Africa, because some of you may not admit it, but you don't even very much know where South Africa is. Some of you may not realize that Africa is a huge continent. Europe is a tiny angle here, corner, if we wanted to overlap the two continents. Africa is so big that North America, South America, China, Europe can easily fit inside Africa if you want to put it that way. In the meantime, I welcome Emiliano from Italy, who is commending me for getting better in my directorial accomplishments. Yesterday, I was fumbling a little bit. Emiliano, you see, I'm using an overlay, learning new tricks every day. Tomorrow, we will talk about exponential technologies and decentralization, but the day after we will talk about tools, going back to software. So I will show you how I'm doing these tricks as well. I also welcome Sushant Zanganepur from Canada, and thanks for wishing me well and wishing me to keep up the productivity, and likewise. So South Africa is an incredible place. Abraham Cambridge, our guest today, is not originally South African, but he decided to move there to locate his startup, the Sun Exchange. Full disclosure, I'm an investor in Sun Exchange, as well as I was on the board of directors until a few weeks ago, and I'm an advisor to the company, as well as a proud owner of the cells that Sun Exchange installs in South Africa. So, Abe, why don't you turn on your camera and let's hear from you as well. Reveal yourself in your full beauty. Welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you? How did you end up in South Africa? What are you doing there? And then we will talk more specifically about COVID-19 in South Africa.
Thanks, David. Sound check, all good? Perfect. So yeah, my background actually in academic terms is in geography. I'm a physical geographer from university. I actually specialised in climate change science. So I started getting fascinated by the way the Earth's climate has changed over the eons, from the birth of the planet to today. How radically different the world's environment has been. And then I started to really dig down and realize what kind of an uncontrolled experiment the Earth's population is conducting on the Earth's different systems, whether it be the hydrological system or the atmospheric system, etc. It really was quite alarming, the rate in which we are changing all different layers of our planet. So I then started getting into solar energy. I did my master's degree in the science of climate change. I started focusing on solar energy systems and how they can be deployed into the built environment to enable businesses and communities to generate their own electricity in a decentralized manner, completely passively, with no fueling costs. And once you've got the hardware built, you then have access to essentially free electricity for the longevity of that solar panel. But obviously I'm from the UK, and for many of the benefits of being from Britain, access to sunshine is not one of them. And the UK government in about 2010, 2011, were subsidising solar power, which enabled that industry to grow. And this is around the same time I was starting my first business, which was a solar installation company. But then when the UK government did a U-turn, they started to take subsidies out of renewables and start subsidising fracking and various other fossil fuel access. So I decided actually the future for solar energy is not in the UK, it's in a sunny country in the world. I applied for a job in Australia where my sister had relocated, and just so happened that the company I was applying for a job with cancelled the position in Sydney, Australia, and created a position in Cape Town. So I got a call from my old employer at DNVGL saying, why not move to Cape Town and start building out the solar division of our engineering out of Cape Town. I took the job, moved here, and then realized that actually the issues that South Africa as a country, in fact, all emerging markets faces, far exceeds the issues which the developed economies face. So, for example, in more advanced economies, you're kind of persuading people to switch from an energy system which is perfectly well built, it works, it runs, it's affordable, and it's reliable. And you're persuading people to switch to solar. But when you come to somewhere like South Africa, where the electricity grid doesn't actually work very well, it's getting increasingly expensive by about 10% a year. And then you deploy a technology like solar energy into a country like that, it's a remarkable breakthrough. You can now deploy energy systems to on any level, whether it be a remote village, a remote community, or an operating business up to a mine or even a city in South Africa or any other emerging market, much faster and a much lower cost than deploying conventional centralized fossil fuel production. So it's a kind of a convergence of my understanding of solar energy systems, but also the socio-economic issues around energy and energy access that really drove me to create Sun Exchange. So within about 3 months of being here, I realized that if you connect the universal desire for the world to transition away from fossil fuels using a blockchain payment system, you can then create this peer-to-peer solar panel micro-leasing engine, which is the Sun Exchange, which allows anyone anywhere in the world to own a solar panel that's located in the sunniest places on Earth, such as here in South Africa, lease those solar panels to businesses and communities and earn an income from them. And that's what we set up in 2015. And here we are in 2020, and we've just produced 2 gigawatt hours of electricity.
That is wonderful. And when I learned, I think 4 years ago, about Sun Exchange, for me, it was very exciting because it was really at the intersection of so many independently exploding trends. On one hand, renewable energy, on the other hand, the decentralized and globally connected enthusiasm with which people could support projects wherever they were, originally spearheaded by the likes of Kickstarter and Indiegogo, but that specialized platforms like Sun Exchange could implement as well in a different but equally powerful manner. And of course, also blockchain, because Sun Exchange incorporates the ability of paying for the sales in Bitcoin, as well as receiving the payments that the sales generate over the course of the contracts in Bitcoin as well, which can be taken out or reinvested circularly in an exponential fashion.
And in microscopic units. I mean, before cryptocurrency technology came along, there was no way you could transmit 1/100th of a US cent from one person on Earth to another. Completely unfeasible. We didn't even think about it. There'd be no point even considering it. And now it's possible.
And it is possible to buy a sell on Sun Exchange for as little as €10 or $10 and earn the benefit of the ownership of that sell over the course of 10 years. And to know that that kind of financial upside is not going to be eaten up by intermediaries, by banking fees, by wire transfer fees, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, what we're actually offering people to do is become a solar power generator. I mean, you come to the sunexchange.com, you buy a solar panel, it's installed. You are now generating electricity from your computer, from wherever you are in the world. So you're now contributing energy to the world's networks, and solar powering businesses that require that energy. And it's all done from a computer, and it's done a click of a button. No before has this technology allowed such a thing to happen.
Now today's conversation is not about the Sun Exchange, but I cannot but ask you also another question. What is your pipeline? Because yes, I'm sure there's a lot of different places that would like solar panels in South Africa, but isn't demand a limiting factor?
The demand is enormous. I mean, there's so many unelectrified communities on the continent, and a lot of businesses are running generators from diesel fuel, which is very, very expensive. And the energy networks themselves are very dilapidated. They were built a long time ago and not been upgraded. So there's this desperate need to upgrade the network, but the governments are just too broke to be able to build it themselves. They're very reluctant to go to the private sector because most of the utilities in Africa are publicly owned, but just badly run. So unfortunately, this means for businesses that they have to rely on producing their own electricity. But for businesses that don't have access to capital or don't wish to deploy their own capital into running a generator, they're kind of or buying their own solar power system. They're just forced to buy diesel fuel and unreliable electricity from the grid, and that's where Sun Exchange comes in. I think just one point I was actually going to add previously was what we've actually created is actually kind of a new asset class. I mean, the ability to own a solar panel that's producing electricity, that's not impacted by the world's markets. So even in the past month, where we've seen absolute turmoil in across the markets, across the board, our solar panels are still producing the same amount of electricity that they ever have done, and that's electricity being sold at the same price. So this is almost like a new safe haven. It's a new way to have yourself as a source of passive income that's actually almost completely removed from the global markets.
So as we look at South Africa, the fact that the coronavirus is now there is important. It is what prompted us to have the conversation today. And this is an article from South Africa, SABC. I don't know what BC stands for.
Broadcasting Corporation.
Okay, SABC News Online, 554 cases of COVID-19. Luckily, nobody died yet. And what is the feeling on the ground? What do you feel, and what do your fellow country people feel?
Very interesting question. What do I feel? I think until now we've kind of been positioned at the bottom of Africa, kind of watching the world unfold as this horrific chain of events has unfurled, and we've kind of been watching it from afar. But now it's here, and we're now experiencing for ourselves. It's actually quite surreal. It's like I've been watching a sci-fi movie online, like a kind of a real-time reality sci-fi film, and now it's actually become real from where I'm sat. So I mean, the mood on the street is somewhat apprehensive. I think the health system in South Africa is very divided. You have a private health sector and a public health sector. The public health sector serves by far the majority of the population of South Africa, many of which are malnourished, many cases of HIV and tuberculosis. So the actual health of South Africans generally is quite poor. But malnutrition is very common, especially in the young. So it is actually an absolute catastrophe waiting to happen if this virus were to spread. And I think everybody knows it. But at the same time, levels of unemployment in South Africa are huge. And it's not like in this country, people live paycheck to paycheck. People in this country, most people live day to day. They're trying to get enough money together to survive a day. So economic interruption, even for a week, could cause absolute mayhem. The country is basically on thin ice as it is economically, and therefore any breakdown in further job losses and businesses, it could be very, very devastating. But the government has just taken a big view on locking down the country on Thursday for 21 days.
So if we look at the global map of the world, it looks like everything is happening in Europe now, where there are many blobs because there are many countries, and this chart, this map represents each country with its individual blob. But of course, we know that China, which is the largest, is the one that is growing the least, or actually it is not growing at all. And the United States is now the one that is growing the fastest. And South Africa, with its 500 plus cases, would seem not much. And I think what is very important for everybody to understand, if they haven't yet, is that once in a given country there is local transmission that has been detected, it means that there has been local transmission for the past 2 weeks. So the number of undetected cases is probably 10 times as much than the cases that have been detected, because as of right now, nobody in the world is able to test each person. These are just samples. Even more, the people who are sick is because they realized they are sick and they went to a doctor to say they are sick, and then they were tested. So in South Africa right now, there are probably 5,000 or 10,000 cases. And once this process starts, it has the same shape everywhere in the world. The chart that I am showing now has been generated based on the data from World of Meters that shows in this last column the number of cases that are in a given country per million residents. And the data is such that if you go to the previous chart I've shown, the transmission rate from one infected person to 2-3 more that the infection is spreading through is what fuels this exponential growth. And here in the vertical axis, we have the number of people per million inhabitants that are infected. And in the horizontal axis, horribile dictu, horrible to say, compared to Italy, what is the number of days that any given country is behind. The assumption being that the number of people infected per million inhabitants after a month will reach Italy, right? So that is what we are looking at, unless, of course, the draconian physical distancing measures that have been put in place by the Chinese are not also adopted by a given country. So the article that I showed before says that the lockdown is starting in a couple of days from March 26 for 3 weeks. And so what's your comment on that, Abe? Is the lockdown going to be, for example, strict enough? And is the lockdown going to be respected by the people who should comply with it?
Well, in 24 days, we'll find out. But I think fundamentally, firstly, just a commentary on the graphs you just showed. Interesting, you're referring to cases per million. A really interesting stat, which I was looking at today, is number of tests per million of the population. The United States is currently on about 125 tests per million population in America. And it's only from those tests you even know you've got a case. I think the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, is far in the lead in the world. I think they've tested something like 12,000 people per million for testing for corona. And then if you look at the countries with no reported cases of corona, there's some obvious ones like, Tuvalu and Vanuatu in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But then you've got countries like Mozambique and Botswana and Mali, like big African countries with no reported cases, but that's because they just not have tested anybody. So again, it's, as you just said, it's far more likely that there's 10-fold more people who are actually carrying the virus than are reported. So that's just one comment on that. The second case, so in regards to lockdown and will it be effective and the impacts of it, I'm pretty sure that most people will observe it. I think people have now seen the impacts around the world of people who, for example, in Italy or countries which responded later into the realization that this is a real issue. I think South Africa is somewhat an advantage there to have seen the impacts. However, the economic impacts of it are going to be extraordinary. And I think the government know that. I mean, I was in two minds a couple of days ago thinking, are the government actually going to do an economic lockdown and just let people die. It's it's either one or the other, really, or there's a middle ground. But I think what's going on now is that there is an enforcement going on, but a number of allowances on the lockdown is actually quite broad. So, for example, if you work in the energy sector, if you work in the water sector, food production sector, you are allowed out. You're allowed to your work. You're allowed to do your job, but it's within very, very specific sectors which they perceive to be critical to running the economy. Supermarkets are obviously included, as are self-employed electricians and builders and workers and people who work on building sites. When you include all those people, that's still a very, very, very large population, which is not therefore applied by the lockdown. So there is a lockdown unless you are of these categories, but those categories are very broad. But if they were to have a full lockdown, then the economic consequences of which would be absolutely devastating. So they have to have somewhat of the economy running on silent running, kind of red alert, vital services only. But actually, where that frame is placed and how many people can position themselves in that frame is yet to be seen. I mean, Sun Exchange, we are deploying energy into a country which the energy network could collapse at any minute. So theoretically, we are also classified in that block. We're providing energy security. We're preventing load shedding, so we can carry on doing our work. Our solar installers should be able to go and carry on doing our solar installations. But where do you draw the line? Where's the net? And that's really it. I mean, we've got 21 days to find out. And David, I messaged you last night to ask you. We've got a 21-day lockdown. How long have you been under lockdown? How long have you been in quarantine? Was it originally 14 days? Was it 21 days? And then it was extended. I mean, did they know when they put you under quarantine how long it was going to go on for?
Well, when it was announced originally, it was supposed to be for a couple of weeks, and then they extended it. And I believe it will be extended further. Now, Italy may be an outlier, also because the fatality rate here is huge. Rather than the 3-4% reported in China, whether you trust their numbers or not, and the incredibly low fatality rate being reported in Germany, here the fatality rate is over 10%. 10% of the healthcare professionals are infected, which is, of course, hair-raisingly dangerous because it means on one hand that they were not protected enough as they were working, and on the other hand that the ability of the healthcare system to provide for the ill is also being impacted by those people being sick. The compliance of the people is pretty good. I don't know if you can read the numbers that I'm showing. This is data compiled at the roadblocks. There are roadblocks all over the country. You are not supposed to leave your house, if not for grocery shopping or for those jobs that are permitted based on the infrastructural exceptions as being essential, or for urgent health issues. And if you are stopped and the roadblock doesn't accept your reasons, you were fined for €200. Now the fine is €5,000, and you could be criminally prosecuted with up to 3 months jail if you broke the physical distancing measures. But if you broke the quarantine, so you were under quarantine and you broke that, the imprisonment is until up to 12 years, right?
So that's if you're known to be infected and you break quarantine.
That's right. That's right.
So you're knowingly going to go and infect people.
Yeah, that's right. So at these roadblocks, over the course of the past 3 weeks, they did over 1 million checks. Over 1 million people were stopped. And 95% of the cases it was okay for them to be on the road. Okay? It means that there were 5% who were non-compliant. Now, you could ask, okay, were the police or the military at the roadblocks too lenient or not? Whatever. We don't know. It's always hard, right? But this is anyway data that you can start from, and it would indicate that the people have been and are complying. Now, there are very favorable infrastructural reasons for this as well. 80% of the people in Italy own the houses they live in. They may still be paying mortgage, but there are now measures for allowing the mortgages to be paid late without any penalties, without any consequences, right? I don't know exactly if those measures have already been enacted or they still debating them, but that is very, very favorable. And of course, a lot of families have savings. So contrary to what you describe of people going paycheck to paycheck or even day by day, they earn what they need to survive day after day, which is hair raising. Here in Italy, people have savings in the bank, and they can go on probably 2-3 months, at least on average, without too big of an issue. There is, of course, people who are poor. The official poverty rate is around 10%, but on average, people are wealthy. And Emiliano Morgia, one of our listeners, followers, is saying that it doesn't matter because the lockdown will have to be lifted no matter what, sooner or later. And I agree with him. We can't go on like this for a year or 2 years until a vaccine is found and mass produced and everyone is vaccinated. So there will be a decision made by each government when to decide and how to decide to lift the draconianly restrictive measures that save lives but damage the economy.
So I mean, I've got one question and one thought piece on what that is, on what you're referring to. I think firstly, I mean, obviously there's a concern that this becomes the norm. Will it actually end? Will this become business as usual? Will, once there are such checks in place, I mean, will there be a global paranoia of viruses, and therefore now on there will be checkpoints for testing people for viruses and making sure people have had vaccines before crossing borders? I mean, just as after the September 11th attacks in 2001, it became the norm to have much higher levels of security at airports. I remember flying with a Swiss Army knife in my pocket when I was 12. And now, of course, you can't get through with a bottle of water. So, I mean, do you think the world as we know it is going to change from now on? There will always be further checkpoints and greater vigilance and paranoia around viruses. I imagine even before going to an airport, you potentially could have a UV wash. You have to be literally decontaminated before going in a building. That could become the norm. We don't know.
So yes, I am thinking about these issues, of course, and we have to. What we are doing is understanding our planet at a finer detail than ever before, and this fine-grained understanding and mapping now is resolving a view that we didn't think we could or should care about at the level of bacteria and viruses. So should we embrace this knowledge or should we ignore it? I think we should definitely embrace it.
That was my thought piece. The second thing I wanted to comment on was actually, I mean, from a purely academic perspective, emotions aside, what we're able to now witness before our very eyes is what happens when you cut emissions drastically. Like air travel is basically coming to a halt. Manufacturing processes, car manufacturing is basically going to cease. We will see before our very eyes what will happen to atmospheric contaminants and the world's air streams when you just cease anthropogenic forcing. So what environmentalists are saying for years is don't fly unless you absolutely have to. Well, right now we're being forced to witness what happens when everyone stops flying, and we will see whether CO2, NO2, SO2 oxide, and SOx levels come down and under what time period, and we will see if there's any impact of that.
I know it's unfair, but and we shouldn't be gloating, but wouldn't it be incredible to get into the minds of a no-vaxxer climate change denier now, and to inspect his or her thought processes, assuming they have any, and see themselves ask the questions. Do I really not want my kids to be vaccinated against COVID-19 or my mother? Do I really not, can I deny still that the brightening of the skies and the clearing of the waters is due to the fact that we people are not clogging it up, the systems anymore? So certainly it's fascinating. Now, assuming that we want to act on the knowledge that we are acquiring, the second step is the infrastructure layer that we will be deploying in order to be able to do the acting. And here, as we are talking about pathogens and the knowledge about pathogens, I am looking at Middle Ages in Europe, where there were no sewage systems, and there would be the night bowls emptied on the streets unthinkingly, and it was absolutely the norm. You would walk around in the unpaved streets, or if the best probably was cobblestones, and you would pay attention so that you wouldn't catch the emptying of a night bowl full of urine and feces, shit and piss from anybody. And then people would get cholera and would get whatever other kind of illness borne by human feces, and they would not put the two and two together until finally we did. And then we decided that it would be better to deal with everything differently. The water closet was invented. The sewage systems were reinvented because the Romans had it 2,000 years ago. And now we have a good understanding, for example, that surgeons have to wash their hands, which was also not something that until little more than 100 years ago people would do. And one surgeon would infect the next patient, or in the maternity wards, people would not wash their hands as they were helping one mother give birth and then the next. And there would be horrible infections transmitted one to the other. So what is the infrastructure that we are going to put in place as a consequence of what is going on today? The ability to test in real time, not against one, but against hundreds of viruses, and it will absolutely become the norm. And then after a while, we will not even be able to imagine that there was a time that people could enter a shopping center, an office building, or board an airplane and you wouldn't even know they could be infected. They would shed viruses by the millions, and we didn't know, and we did nothing about it. Can you imagine what a barbaric time? So yes, that is what we are going to do. And of course, the big question is, how can we stop this knowledge from being abused by whoever will aim to abusing that knowledge, with various things being put in place as a consequence of the panic today that give power to whatever branches of the government or new departments being created, and then that power will never be relinquished. So definitely that is what we have to watch out against.
Don't forget, David, that there generally are people who believe that Bill Gates started this. You know, they're a bit. You know, so people will refuse a vaccine because they believe that this was a man-made thing and it's about population control, and that if you're asked to take a vaccine because it will make you immune to viruses and your family immune, they will refuse it because they believe they're being controlled. And
sorry to point fingers, but in South Africa, if I am not mistaken, a lot of people believe that their manhood is impaired if they wear condoms, and as a consequence, they don't wear condoms, and it is one of the reasons why HIV is so massive a problem in South Africa. Yeah, people can be very ignorant, and even if it is not politically correct, it must be pointed out that ignorance kills, and knowledge empowers.
Totally. Yeah. I think you were saying about climate change deniers, and you said another category, anti-vaxxers. You obviously the bottom rung of that category is obviously the flat earthers, and I think
there was a tragicomic fatal accident a few weeks ago of a flat earther in the US wanting to go in orbit, quotation marks orbit, because I don't know how you can orbit a flat circle, but it has to be admired because he was scientific in his craziness. He wanted to verify his hypothesis, and he was ready to die for his scientific assumption or belief, right?
He got to 13,000 feet because he got to 6,000 feet on his first attempt. He nearly broke his back at the age of 60, and the flat Earth community crowdfunded, using a crowdfunding platform, his steam-powered rocket to get him to 13,000. So yeah, absolutely hats off to his dedication to disproving his null hypothesis.
Really tragicomic. Gio from Romania is asking, what if populist and nationalist regimes will accede to the power in most of the countries? I assume as a consequence of the panic induced and the restrictive measures that are believed to be necessary now. What is the political climate in South Africa around COVID-19? Are elections close by, and will the opposition seize the necessarily imperfect solution that the current government offers?
There was a general election last year, so there's no elections on the horizon. When the president came on TV yesterday to announce, on YouTube or whatever channel you're watching, came on to announce the lockdown, all the political parties stood up beside him and said, actually, this is the correct thing to do. They know whatever they do, this is going to be damaging to the economy, but they have to do it to save human life. No one's saying that it's the wrong thing to do. Everyone knows it's the hard choice. And no one was saying taking advantage of it to get themselves up in the political ladder. I think there's a general understanding that it's devastating if we don't do something. If you allow the virus to spread, it's going to be absolutely catastrophic. And therefore, if you just lock the country down for a short space of time, then it will be catastrophic. I think there could still concerns, of course, in that lockdown period. What happens? No one knows. So I think the calling is therefore as us as individuals, as humans, to reach out with empathy for your neighbours, for your communities, and help people where you can, and not necessarily rely on government to do and solve problems, but actually to address them individually and peer to peer. I think that's really where the power is going to be, is in people putting together as a humanity rather than as political parties.
We will come back to COVID-19 as a theme on Searching for the Question Live. And yes, one of the things that we will need to explore is what is the probability or the possibility that certain socioeconomic phase transformations may be accelerated by the crisis? Who would have thought that Trump will talk about universal basic income, which basically is what now he's saying, that every American should receive $1,000 of economic support. I don't think he's meaning it periodically, like every month, maybe just once. But already the fact that the Republican government is contemplating parachuting cash on people in order to help individuals is unprecedented. And a lot of financial dogma are being dismantled. I wonder what would happen if today or tomorrow the European Central Bank or the Fed or China would launch a central bank digital currency, whether blockchain based or not. In a borderless world like today, it could very rapidly spread around and create a new crisis, a financial crisis for those countries that want to maintain their financial independence from that solution, or financial salvage for those countries that know that they cannot manage by themselves. So as we are getting to the end of today's show, Abe, I really want to thank you for sharing your perspective. I have had the pleasure of visiting you and others in South Africa, but there's so much more that remains to be seen. I don't know if in a month's time or in 6 months' time or whenever things will go back, or things will not go back. But whatever the new balance is going to be, yes, flights are going to be reestablished, and I will want to come back to South Africa to spend time again together. And I very much agree with what you said. Empathy, human society, a shared understanding of our objectives and challenges is a necessary starting point for solving today's problems, as well as to know that we have the joint common power to solve those that will come tomorrow.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much for being with us. And thanks, everybody, Emiliano, Geo, and Jonathan from Argentina. I offered Jonathan to come on the show, but he's going crazy with a newborn and a 3-year-old being in lockdown in an apartment in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And he didn't feel like sharing the screams with us, evidently. Sushian and everybody else who came to share their comments. Stefania, you are joining a bit late, and Chila from Hungary. Feel free to speak up, send observations, questions, suggestions for what we should talk about the following days as well. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.
Ciao.